Still have some people join us. I got a couple of emails with folks asking questions about the link. Hopefully people can join us shortly. It is 1:02, so first and foremost, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Beyond 77 Innovation and Technology Workshop. My name is Agustin Rodriguez. I'm the Transportation and Planning Engineer for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, or CRTPO. Before I begin, a couple of housekeeping items as we have on the screen. First, please try to type your first and last name, followed by your organization or agency. Also, please mute your audio when you're not speaking. Use only one source of audio, your computer or phone, and do not put your phone on hold. Please try to submit questions in the chat box when possible, but we're gonna have opportunity to speak up and request the floor. To doing that, please state your first name and pass for acknowledgement from the speaker or presenter before proceeding. I'm gonna go over the names that I can see on my screen really quick, and then allow for those who can't type their names or are on a phone, on a cell phone or otherwise, for them to introduce themselves. So I have on my screen, I have Theo Thompson, Adam Howell, Judy Deller O'Keefe, David Howard, Jim Conti, Adam O'Brien, Andrew Ventresca, Andy Grimsky, Anil Paniker, Anna Gallup, Ati Abad, Ben Stein, Brandon Brazil, Bryans, Courtney Weeder, David Hooper, Dean Goodison, Dominic Boyd, Eric Xavier, Erica Martin, Gary Fournier, James Parhill, Jason Bailey, Darrell Leonard, Jim Thornton, Joe Boost. Let's keep moving around when somebody joins. John Boudreau, John Gales, Krista Gooding, Loretta Barron, Mary Louise Adam, Mark Boggs, Matthew Toss, Dr. Mike Miltuck, Mike Manis, Neil Berg, Rob Hillman, Robert Cook, Steve Hoover, Tariq Kiley, Trent Sellers, Tyler Bray. Then I have a couple of individuals after that, and if I skip your name, please tell us your name and your organization. And please type it on the chat box as well. Anybody else that I didn't call? Okay, thank you. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. David Howard, who is the North Carolina Department of Transportation Chief Deputy Secretary. David oversees the high-level operations of the DMV, the non-highway divisions, civil rights in partnership with historically Black colleges and universities, as well as transportation planning. David most recently served as the Associate Administrator of Policy and Governmental Affairs for the Federal Highway Administration, when he was a principal advisor and managed a team involved in transportation policy development, legislative analysis, highway data collection, and international programs. His office was responsible for overseeing the Federal Highway Administration's implementation of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. Prior to joining the U.S. Department of Transportation, he served as the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Fund Development for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Partnership, the largest developer of affordable housing in the region. David was also a member of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission for 6 years before being elected in 2009 to serve as the member at large of the City of Charlotte Council. And I would like to highlight that Mr. Howard represented the City Council on the CRTPO board for 4 years. He was also the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission no-voting representative to CRTPO prior to that. In addition, David has a wealth of national and state leadership experience, including the National Black Caucus of Local Elected Officials, the National Urban Land Institute, the German Marshall Fund, the B&W Foundation, Responsible Leaders Community, and the North Carolina League of Municipalities. David is a proud product of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. David, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction.
David, you are.
There I am. You guys put me on mute. First of all, thank you, Axine, for that kind introduction. Before I get going, let me actually recognize a couple of friends that I think are joining us on the call. Actually, there are many friends on this call from the names you just shared. But I think we're being joined today by my good friend, Gene Conti, former Transportation Secretary for the state of North Carolina. And I believe my former boss and friend, former Secretary of Transportation, Jim Trogdon, is joining us today as well. So before I get started, I want to make sure that we understand how much the Charlotte region actually should appreciate the leadership of those two gentlemen before I give you my remarks. If I remember this right, Jim and Gene, under you all's leadership, we saw 485, the loop get completed. We saw 485 in the south get expanded. We saw I-77 get expanded. We saw I-85 through Cabarrus County get expanded. We had the Yadkin River Bridge that was completed, which we all know is important to our region. The Blue Line Extension funding got worked through. Funds for Gateway Station got secured. ULI did a plan along I-74 that is now somewhat the blueprint for the way that we're approaching light rail in that corridor. And then, of course, Jim, under your leadership, while you were my boss, we did a lot to expand the leadership option, the expansion and rail options for our rail service between Raleigh and Charlotte. And did I mention that $500 million that they got in air funds to help improve the route between Charlotte and Raleigh. So, Augustine, before we start, I just wanted to make sure we gave those gentlemen their due while they were on the phone. So to my remarks, there's never been a more exciting time in Charlotte surrounding transportation planning initiatives. You have the NC Moves 2050 plan, which I'm proud to say that I've helped lead during my time in Raleigh, where we're learning that, in addition to the fact that, the state is going to grow by millions of people, the 2/3 of that growth will be in the Charlotte and the Triangle area. We have the Charlotte Moves initiative. That's the mayor's task force that's looking at transportation needs in our city. We have the Charlotte Regional Transit Plan that is dubbed Connect Beyond, that's being done by the COG. We have the Charlotte Gateway Station that now has a developer chosen, and we're working with the city to make that happen. We have the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance's Infrastructure Series, which I was happy to moderate the first session. And then, of course, we have the Beyond77 initiative that we're talking about today, and then so many other initiatives underway. It's a rare occasion to have the opportunity that you have today, and that is an opportunity to envision the future of an entire corridor instead of focusing on addressing a single transportation challenge. We are all aware that the future holds many unknowns. As a matter of fact, COVID has highlighted the many unknowns that we have and added a few to the list. But it's important to remember that in times of great uncertainty, there is this great opportunity. Beyond77 is a great opportunity to bring people together with a shared goal. Creating a plan for this region that will meet the future needs of the people who live, work, and travel here. A plan that would examine the needs of the future and offer suggestions to meet those needs in a way that helps people from different backgrounds with different perspectives and needs live to their fullest potential. Our research at the state level shows that people are eager for options. They want different forms of transportation. I mean, whether that be in bus systems, rail systems, bike and pedestrian options, as well as light rail and other options we don't even know about. I mean, we all remember how surprised we were when e-scooters showed up a couple of years ago. I don't think we've seen the last of those, not to even mention all that we're doing with drones right now. Bringing people together to develop a comprehensive plan that will lay the groundwork for a diverse transportation system that is modern, multimodal, resilient, flexible, and that will benefit everybody is our goal. So on behalf of NCDOT, CARPO, and the numerous other leaders from around the Charlotte region, I want to thank you for taking time to be part of this effort. Although this is a virtual workshop, I believe you will feel almost like we're all in the same physical space thanks to the work of the project team. The project is nearly 1 year completed, and in that 1 year, an immense amount of research and public engagement took place. And to speak more about that, I'll turn it over now to Adam Howell, Senior Project Manager from Atkins and the Consultant Project Manager for Beyond77. Adam is going to share updates on the large amount of research and public engagement that took place thus far. So really, I just wanted to welcome you. I wanted to encourage you to be involved with this process all the way through to the end. And Adam, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, and I appreciate those words and remarks, and certainly excited to keep the next year going. First, I want to talk with everybody here about just an overarching workshop purpose and objective. And so we want to hear from you about innovative ideas that can help improve and enhance mobility along the entire I-77 corridor from Statesville all the way down to Rock Hill. It's a large undertaking, and there can be some incredible ideas that come out of today's conversation and further conversations. Your feedback today will be used to develop new mobility-related strategies and solutions for CRTPO and all of its regional partners to consider in the short term and long term for implementation through so many different levels. Today, what we've heard, especially experiencing through COVID and other impacts recently, is that non-incremental changes are possible during non-normal times. We have the ability to think freely and outside the box today with no constraints, and we want to hear from you for the topics we have designed with CRTPO to make those ideas come forward. Nothing is off the table. And we want to know, how can we create actionable items with you to enhance mobility for everyone? In order to keep everyone engaged, even though we have breakout sessions as a part of this, I want you to bring up a browser, whether you're on your phone or on a computer. Please go to menti.com and enter that code in. And I'll leave this up on the screen for just a second. We have a couple of questions thrown in here to kind of get you to think about the magnitude of the future of what we're doing. This is also the magnitude of the research and the public engagement efforts that have gone underway for this project. So again, go to menti.com and that code 3116951. And when we get to the questions on the slides, you'll be asked, you'll be prompted to start answering a question. And so it'll be a good little, not quite icebreaker, but a good way to kind of keep everyone engaged before we get into the breakout sessions so that we can continue the dialogue about our solutions and strategies for our entire region. And I'll have this code up in the website just in case you missed it in a subsequent slide. Before we get into our breakout session, starting to think about the future, we've got to know where we came from. And the Charlotte region has done a lot of work in terms of transportation and mobility related efforts. And it turns out the I-77 corridor is one of the most critical corridors in the metropolitan region. We developed a comprehensive plan of 3 steps over the past several months that looked at a slew of plans. And I'm talking, we probably reviewed hundreds of planning documents and policies and objectives to look at everything. We also worked with the transportation demand model and trying to look at what the projections are for the future of congestion based on certain build outs of new infrastructure. And then we did a preliminary need assessment or review to link transportation and land use issues. In parallel with all that, we did a comprehensive regional public engagement effort to really hear from people across the entire corridor. And we did not want to leave anybody out. And we'll talk a little bit more about those efforts in a few slides. To give you some regional or geographic context, the entire study area, like I said, goes from Statesville all the way down to south of Rock Hill along I-77 with an average of about 3 miles across that corridor. And we've broken it down into 3 geographic zones for a little bit easier digestion, and each one of those zones has its own challenges and opportunities to work through when we look at mobility opportunities for all. A quick snapshot of who lives here. Just within those 3 miles from that highway, there is over 1 million people living there. That represents roughly 40% of the entire metropolitan region, which is saying a lot for how many people focus in and are concentrated towards one primary facility for mobility needs. And you can see the age breakdown, and median household income is around $76,000. Who lives here? This is a broader look at the Charlotte metropolitan region up and down that corridor. This is a great map produced by the University of Virginia. It's the racial dot map produced, unfortunately, back in 2010, and I'm sure they'll update it with the new census in 2020 when that data gets released. But it helps us to understand trends, and of course, we looked at other data that comes through, but this is the best visual representation we could come up with and portray to showcase everybody on the same slide. We don't want to separate or leave any one group out, and so this is a great image to portray, and we'll of course look at the new data that comes out with the Census 2020 and other efforts going on within the region. When we look at the entire corridor, as I said earlier, we created this umbrella process to look at everything from overarching land use plans for every jurisdiction into modal specific plans such as the CAT 2030 plan or some of their BRT and light rail plans for the future. And then we started to look at some of the detailed project plans from both MPOs that we're interacting with, which is CRTPO and RFATs. And it was a top-down approach that involved looking at over 17 different primary plans. We evaluated and looked at and read through and connected over 1,000 goals, objectives, and policies. We reviewed 42 different secondary plans of multiple modes and almost 400 independent plan and program projects up through 2045. That's no small undertaking. What we did is we ended up developing 7 overarching themes, which you see here on the slide, and has been built into the foundation of Beyond77's existing and future conditions assessment. And what we're doing is we're starting to tie these themes in with some potential strategies that the region could use for consideration with future regional planning with a relation to mobility. Some of those could be need for an actual regional planning themes and goals development process, looking harder at that housing mobility relationship articulation. And some cities and towns are doing it more than others. Looking at the integration of transit needs with land and mobility planning. And those are just a few examples of what we've come up with at this point in time. So again, I see some of you have already found that question. And so the code on the top, menti.com, 3116951. The question is, by 2045, what percentage will vehicle hours delay increase across the major highways in the Beyond77 study area? And this applies to only 77, 485, 85, and 277. We'll give it about 10 more seconds to get some answers to filter in here. All right, we have a pretty overwhelming assumption that 330% is that number. And in fact, those that chose 451%, that is the average just within our study area of what the model is telling us is going to be the projection on the highways in 2045. So that again is just an indicator of where we need to be looking at for some strategy solutions for congestion mitigation in the future for this corridor and the intersecting and parallel networks. As a reminder, this study does not focus on the highway itself in terms of infrastructure needs, but it certainly could look at technologies and other strategies to help mitigate congestion on or off the highway. So to help kind of sum that up, these are breakdowns of individual numbers. I-77 will experience about 130% increase, and that's a lower number, mainly due to the express lanes on the north side of the city. I-45 is predicted to 224, I-85 just within the study area is expected to see about a 467% increase, and 277 nearly 1,000% increase. So if interstates experience this type of projection of congestion, we'll then think about the arterial and non-interstate roadways in the study area, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. But I want to make sure I preempt your questions that you're thinking, well, what about COVID impacts on the current network? And so these numbers come from NCDOT back at the end of July, and this is actually looking at the arterial traffic network, not the interstate network. And if you can see, Charlotte arterial network is the dotted orange line pretty much following the average white curve in the middle of the chart. And what it's telling you is that really there's about an 11%, 10 to 11% decrease from original numbers. So there is some impact from COVID, but the numbers are rising back up to normal operations, and it may in fact go back to normal in some due time. So we certainly want to keep COVID in mind when we're preparing for impacts and resiliency, but we want to note that there's the opportunity for a sense of normalcy to return after some factor of time. A quick breakdown of how we're looking at land use in conjunction with transportation. When we went through all of the land use plans and land use designations and zoning codes, we went through and summarized them into 6 simple categories. And that, again, was no small feat, but what we did was we created what you see on the screen is the mixed use index or the mixed use indicator, which demonstrates the potential for enhanced land use and transportation connections or choices to be made. The darker the color you see on the screen is the more opportunity that you have for creating higher mode choice, and then that would help to indicate to the local jurisdictions and planners and developers that there could be a heightened sense of development or mixed use, transit development and whatnot to help encourage that mode choice to occur. And what you'll start to see pop up is the concept of mobility hubs potentially, or other aspects throughout the entire region. And so you'll see the map that you're seeing here is the north is on the left, the metro or center of Charlotte is on the middle, and then the south from about Pineville all the way down to Rock Hill is on the right. When we pair these images, we had to switch colors because the red, white, and green congestion lines did not look good on the burnt orange. When you pair these colors and you're looking at 2019 values here, you can already start to see where opportunities exist for development to occur and encourage that mode choice for transportation and better connections and collaboration and coordination between planning and transportation. And so this helped us to develop a list of preliminary needs based on geography. And it created a little bit more sense of heightened action to look at more micro-focused solutions while still working with CRTPO to focus on corridor-wide strategies to enhance mobility for all. So with that, that'll take us to our second question on Menti.com. And we're going to pivot to now our public engagement efforts that we did in parallel with all of that research the past several months. While you're answering this question, we did conduct a corridor-wide public engagement effort for roughly 6 weeks. This is pre-COVID, so people were not bored sitting at home with nothing to do except to answer our survey. So I hope that didn't change some of your answers. But again, keep that in mind. And so got some very optimistic people here. I'm glad. Give everybody about 10 more seconds. And so we worked very diligently with a marketing communications team in coordination with CRTPO to push forward really what has not been done before, at least from CRTPO's perspective. And it was using mass digital marketing to really engage with every demographic we possibly could. And so I can see that there's a leveling out, an assumption between the low end of 2,700 to about 15,000. And to be honest with you, We had over 15,000 survey responses in just 6 weeks, and we shattered the records. And honestly, from a public engagement standpoint, even from our marketing company that we're working with, it is shattering industry standards for public engagement in such a short time frame. So I really want to kudos to the entire team between CRTPO and the consultants for making that happen. We collected over 100,000 different qualitative comments and over 400,000 individual data points, which is overwhelming in and of itself. So we had to create this incredibly interactive visual dashboard to help us digest the data. We broke it down by the geographic zones. We broke it down by demographics. We broke it down by looking at maps and understanding the roadways people travel on. And we even put in an AI algorithm to understand sentiment based on people's thoughts and feelings as they're writing their answers. And what turns out is that we have a very well-informed public. And the top cause of perceived congestion is the fact that a lot of people, and when I mean a lot of people, over 60% of people responding to this out of those 15,000 coordinated the fact that there's poor coordination between transportation and land development planning. We also are experiencing a very well-traveled public. Those who responded to the survey have indicated that they travel on almost every single road, whether interstate, arterial, or primary roadway network. And so they're bringing us their experiences to us, and we're ready to listen, and we have been listening. We've been reading through these comments. And so this is just a snapshot of the fact that we are hearing them, and we're working on those solutions and strategies. Looking at that sentiment, this may seem common sense, but when we put it together in the numbers, this graph is telling you the relative miles traveled. So the further you go on the x-axis is the longer the person's travel distance, and the line that's going down is their overall perceived satisfaction with that drive or commute. And so the longer somebody spends driving or commuting from one place to another, the less happy they seem to be. Makes sense, right? We don't like to spend a lot of time in our cars or traveling anywhere. And then the next question that really stuck out to us was, with respect to the highway itself for Interstate 77, the more often that they use that highway, regardless of where they live in the region, the less happy they seem to be using it. So that then tells us how we need to focus our strategies and solutions on the parallel and intersecting networks to improve those experiences on a local and or regional effort. And another thing is looking at mode choice, as David Howard was saying earlier. While this is a breakdown by race and ethnicity based on preference of alternative modes of transportation, that the light rail is by far the most dominant preferred method of going. And then the next one is they don't want to take anything but their car. So working on that as a region to better define perception, as well as to continue to market those different mode choices, is we'll come up with some strategies on that as well. And last but not least, after doing all that research and engagement, we did a vision and needs development process. And you may be asking yourself, why did you do the vision process almost a year in? And well, we needed to understand where the region stood in terms of mobility and land use connection and preferences and desires. And so you see on the screen here, the vision for our entire study and for the region and partners to adapt and adopt is the Beyond 77 corridor study will strengthen the multimodal network surrounding the interstate by providing a strategic, innovative, equitable, and comprehensive toolbox of effective strategies, policies, and programs that will guide the diverse community's mobility future. And as a part of that, we identified 7 independent yet coordinated mobility issues factors here, and those would be safety and road conditions, mode choice, innovation, network connectivity, freight, congestion, land use, and transportation coordination. And with that, it may seem like we're just getting started, but we've done so much work, and we're looking forward to the next year of coming up with the solution strategies that we are going to start talking about today with you. So with that, Augustine, I'll turn it back to you. I don't know if we have time for a couple of questions, if there are any from the chat box. If not.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, there is a question from John Gales, and he says that it still seems to me that another effort to negotiate with Norfolk Southern for access to use or share the right-of-way north to Statesville will be worthwhile. Is there any partnership agreement that will be undertaken to improve the North NS access to the Southeast port through Colombia in trade for access going north. So I guess I can let anybody else from the consultant team or CRTPO expand on that, but I don't think we have anything right now for that. So the answer will be no, we don't have, but I think this is something important to consider. Not only for this initiative, the Beyond77, but for the other initiatives that are undergoing right now in the region as well. So this is a good point.
And Augustine, I don't know if maybe Gene Conti might have some additional information to add to that critical question from our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I was just going to type this in, but I'll say it. Yeah, I think the NS North issue is pretty much a dead letter at this point. NS does not seem to be interested, even though, as you point out, DOT has a project south of Charlotte that will increase NS access to the Southeast and to South Carolina, and certainly to the ports then. So it's a little bit of a, they're willing to take public money to help them in areas where they want that help. They're not too much interested in partnerships that they don't see benefit for themselves. So that's kind of where we're stuck at this point.
Thank you, Gene.
Can I step in and offer some thoughts behind my question? Augustine?
I'm sorry, say that again?
This is John Gallus. Can I step in and offer some thoughts behind this?
Please, thank you.
The Charlotte region has become an important logistical center that is now very competitive with logistics around Atlanta. The combination of the two logistical centers makes the Southeast more powerful for the attraction of business expansion for the future. And the current location of the intermodal center near the airport certainly is helpful to us, but they don't have a direct access going south. They actually have to come north and then go west before they go to the Atlantic shorelines, to the ports. Somewhere it seems to me there's a bigger question here, not just of the immediate communities, but of the entire region, where this community could once again question the thinking at Norfolk Southern from a broader perspective, to take advantage of these ports from Charlotte. Norfolk Southern's competitor is CSX. They also have access to the ports, but a more direct connection for them would speed the expansion of distribution entities in this region. We've seen a lot from Amazon and other distribution companies recently. I just think it's the kind of overture that ought to be made to encourage discussions, rather than once again simply taking their answer no without some creative energy behind it.
This is Gene Conti again. I'd say those are good thoughts, good questions, John. It's hard to say who should lead that discussion from the public side. You know,
Sure.
Is that a CARTPO issue? Is that an NCDOT issue? You know, again, the public coffers have contributed to that intermodal center at the airport. We had there were tax breaks permitted to Norfolk Southern for that, and there were also investments made by DOT for that intermodal center, similar to that project south of Charlotte. I can't remember what it's a fixing the problem of having them coming up and having to back down and then go in a different direction. So there's opportunity there. It's just very difficult to get them engaged in that discussion, but certainly good suggestions on your part.
Just to add to that, it's important to know that that high-speed rail between Atlanta and Charlotte is still in the works and still being considered, and is a very likely project going forward. And you can even consider the efforts by the new Panther owner, David Tepper, for a cooperative economic development effort between North and South Carolina as expanding economic development opportunities. With the pandemic and the reshoring of companies to provide more resilience to the American economy, the Southeast Corridor is going to be incredibly important for that, because it'll be low-cost space with great distribution potential, and really puts this region into a more competitive position than it's ever been. And I just hope that somewhere there's some leadership within this group or the states that's going to talk about that kind of economic growth over the next 20 years that really offers to help the I-77 corridor be organized more successfully, instead of making all these micro changes along the way when a bigger one could have greater overall impact. Enough from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for those comments and questions. And this is something that we certainly will continue a much larger discussion. We'll include in the conversations and coordination with the transit study known as Connect Beyond. So we will coordinate with them. We are coordinated with them. We certainly will talk about this in more details. So thank you again. Well, just to stay on track and stay on the schedule with the agenda, we will have time at the end of all of the items for more questions and comments. But now back to Adam.
Thank you, Augustine. So really quick, I want to start to define the structure of how we're going to go through our conversation for the remaining of today. And so we have worked with CRTPO to develop what we're calling 5 key areas of innovation. And those 5 key areas are policymaking, programming, emerging technologies, funding concepts, and project implementation methods and/or specific infrastructure needs. Policymaking can be referred to as new systems of principles to guide decisions and achieve rational outcomes. Policy is technically a statement of intent and is implemented as a procedure or protocol that would enable CRTPO or its regional partners collectively to help push things forward. Programming can be defined as a plan or system under which action may be taken toward any one or more goals. Emerging technologies is exactly that. It's new forms of technology that can enhance an already existing part of everyday life, such as mobility that we are talking about today. Funding concepts, the actual revenue source that will pay for the programs or projects implementation, such as the motor fuel tax. And we'll hear from one of our subject matter experts in a little bit about 2 specific concepts relative to help expand our thoughts and processes on that. When I pair project implementation methods and infrastructure needs, there's a reason for that. Project implementation methods are definitive steps or actions to complete a task and reach a solution, and then infrastructure needs are actual projects needed on the ground. And so with those definitions in place, I know that was quick and fast. We did provide those a little bit in context with the slide handouts that we sent over yesterday. Now for the logistics of today. We are looking very much forward to the conversations that we're going to have in these breakout groups. What we're going to do is we are going to showcase to you and explore 2 examples from each of those 5 areas of innovation as an entire group. And then we are going to break out into 6 smaller groups where you will have facilitators from both CRTPO and the consultant team to help facilitate and provoke thought and ideas based on the topic of each one of those areas of innovation. So for example, we're going to start with policy making. We're going to hear from 2 of our subject matter experts on the idea of policy making. and then we're going to then break out and discuss that, and then we're going to come back and talk about what each group heard and discussed. And so with that, I want to hand it over to two of our subject matter experts for policymaking. First is Marie Lewis-Adams, and then the second is John Boudreau. So Marie, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Let's see. Can everyone see me and hear me? Hopefully. Hi, everybody. My name is Marie Lewis-Adams. I am with Atkins. I have a lot of experience in transit planning, so I thought, we'd start off with an example of sort of a successful policymaking innovation regarding transit fare coordination. So this really has to do with, there's lots of regions in the country that have multiple transit agencies serving different portions of the region, including Charlotte. And as the regions grow and develop and kind of blend together, the combination or the integration between those agencies becomes more and more important, how they coordinate. And one area that several regions are working on these days is finding out a way to integrate their fare payment systems. And there's been a good amount of progress on this over the last few years. So today I'm specifically going to be referring to the Seattle region. It's certainly not the only region that has done this. It's just, one of the most comprehensive and hopefully one of the most successful. But there certainly are different models to take into account here. So transit fare coordination has to do with it concerns network connectivity, being able to get around easily, mode choice, and of course innovation. Next slide, please. So there are a few, challenges when it comes to fare coordination, and today I'm not going to talk about the specifics of sort of how of the fare coordination system, but more the policy frameworks that need to be in place in order to encourage this type of integration to take place, because it really does kind of start at the top, and it requires a good amount of coordination and agreement on a number of issues in order to be successful. So some of the challenges that agencies or regions like the Seattle region have faced is it's a multiple agency environment. They need to figure out a way to coordinate different modes, rail, bus, shuttles, first mile, last mile services, and kind of facilitate trips that need to take place between agencies. So in the Seattle region, they coordinated among, there were 7 different transportation providers that all came together to work on this, integrated fare payment system. They call it the ORCA card. And as well as, the MPO was heavily involved, other organizations like the City of Seattle, like the DOT, and they're all engaged in this process. So it really does involve bringing a lot of different players to the table. Some of the things they evaluated were, different ways to structure their fares, different fare media, and supporting technology, things like that. So there are a lot of agreements that do need to take place before any kind of decisions are made in terms of, are they going to, is it going to be, just different passes or different, is there going to be a system-wide discount policy? How do we handle our purchases of fare collection equipment, things like that? So there are a number of challenges before we even get to the fares that we need to tackle. So in this case, in the Seattle region, they did end up developing a closely integrated interagency structure, and some of the things that really made this successful from a policy perspective is it really was kind of a top-down process. The local MPO, the Puget Sound Regional Council, took a really strong role in managing, and encouraging this kind of coordination between the different providers. They set up multiple committees so that the providers can, regularly coordinate, not just on fares, but all sorts of transit integration issues. They do have a standalone fare coordination committee. They even every year they develop and report out a transit integration report that talks about all the progress they've made on integrating the different agencies together. So it really is something that comes from the top that kind of encourages and promotes this process. So one of the things that's interesting when you talk about integration of fares is that, you know, each agency does not have to have an identical fare policy or identical fares at all. In many of the cases in agencies, you know, there's a single type of fare payment, like a card, and you can load different kinds of passes onto it. So it doesn't need to be the same fare, but there are some agreements that are critical to success. First off, you know, there needs to be kind of a policy around how you're going to share costs and distribute revenue after the fact. That's probably the most important part. Procurement policies, you know, how often different agencies procure equipment, what kinds of things do they take into account when they procure different fare collection equipment. That all needs to be worked out. And how they share data. When you've got, you know, different origins and destinations all around the region, how do you share that? How do you, you know, how are your privacy protocols, and how do you integrate it with your apps, your websites, things like that. So all those things from a policy standpoint are really important to have in place. And then the fare system can, you know, the idea is for it to really become a seamless process where you have, you know, one card, one system, and you hopefully can go anywhere in the region. But the policy framework is really important to get in place before any of that can take place.
Very good. Thank you, Marie. Now we'll hand it over to John Boudreau.
Thank you, Adam. Again, I hope everyone can hear me. My name is John Boudreau. I'm with Atkins. Apologize for the confusion. Today we thought we'd talk to you about some of the smart growth principles that are being utilized throughout the world and within the United States here today. Today that our focus is really going to be on some of these smart growth principles that are being utilized and on the four basic areas of balancing multimodal transportation systems, recognition that institutions and governments and businesses and individuals are required to cooperate to support smart growth principles. Third is the planning process and regulation to promote diversity and equality through our communities. And fourth, a regional view of community and economic and ecological sustainability, and how these can be implemented in the 77 growth corridor. We looked at several communities in the United States as well as worldwide, and looking at some of the principles that they're embracing and how they could be utilized in this particular study. Next slide, Adam. Some of these are one of these particular regions is the Singapore region, which has embraced the concept of ensuring that they are truly providing a multimodal transportation system that provides choice through their latest master mobility plan. Many of the key initiatives are easily translated into policies that allow these initiatives to come to life effectively, such as better, more inclusive everyday experiences for their community. Another policy focus for the Singapore study is their commitment to creating integrated transportation hubs throughout the region. And some of their policy goals are to have 20-minute walks from your home to a neighborhood center that would support schools, parks, retail, shopping, or a maximum 45-minute commute from your home to your work or business centers. And again, in these transportation hubs, they're looking at providing all types of multimodal access to, whether it's through transit, bus, different vehicles, and rail. The second item is the recognition that institution and government businesses and individuals are required to cooperate to get to today for smart growth principles. And recent articles have been published that note that partnerships and great coordination is necessary to ensure effective planning. New policies have helped regions to become more organized and encourage coordination and collaboration. One of these communities, I think, is the Atlanta community, and as well as the Denver Regional Transportation District, where there's been incredible success in the concept of smart growth improvements throughout these cities and metro areas, and how those partnerships have worked. I think can provide as an example for our study. The planning process also, of course, wants to promote diversity and equity into the development of the plan. We recently studied the San Francisco Metropolitan Transit Authority, where they reached out to better meet the needs in their community and create a multi-service equity strategy. The equity working groups to prioritize several neighborhoods in the city that may have a higher proportion of minority residents, as well as seniors and disabled residents. While this applies to the city of San Francisco, we can imagine how this vision may be and these policies can be coordinated to enhance the mobility for the 77 corridor. Another community that we looked at is the Baltimore community. The Baltimore Metropolitan Council assisted in some research to demonstrate areas of low opportunity throughout the community. And this research turned into a new policy for the state of Maryland and jurisdictions, which provided increased provisions to require housing vouchers. These housing vouchers in turn provide more upward mobility opportunities, but also actually provided better connections to improve mobility and transportation networks throughout the region. These vouchers are currently available in the Charlotte through the Charlotte Housing Authority, but certain policies are in place that make them difficult to actually acquire. The regional view of the community in economy and ecological sustainability is another goal of smart growth. There's a relationship between the community transportation network system and its economy and ecological sustainability. On average, the freeway capacity has grown faster than population, but congestion and delays explode at much higher rates over the same time. In Charlotte, congestion and delays have grown 3 times as fast as population, but in each region can develop their own policies and strategies to better manage and coordinate the planning and alleviate this challenge. One example of how cities are implementing policies that allow for new mobility solutions is ensuring cities in our urban regions are providing sufficient access to frequent transit services throughout them. While the maps on the left indicate different geographic scales, it demonstrates that Charlotte still has some work to do when recognizing and better transportation alternatives throughout the community. Toronto was recently highlighted as the world's fastest growing city metro area, and one reason is apparent from this map. City of Durham, North Carolina has worked very hard to ensure mode choice opportunities exist by creating policy-making coordination with private development. These efforts have been noticed by neighboring towns and counties, and there are efforts to better recognize modal choice options throughout the community.
Thank you, Marie and John. And with that, we will, the magic behind Zoom will happen, and we will create these breakout groups, and we will start to facilitate the dialogue in just a few seconds.
Welcome back, everyone. You will be automatically mute when you get back to the main lobby, in case you haven't noticed that. Thank you. We had a really good conversation on group number 4, where I was part of. So now, during the next 10 minutes or so, this is a good segment for anyone. Please jump in, and if you want to tell us some of those conversations that you were having. I guess I can start with my group. I asked questions about the smart cities. There was a little bit of quietness in the room. So Jim Conti, he asked about the transit fare condition. And the remaining of the time that we were in the room, that was the topic. We had Dr. Pulugurta with UNC Charlotte telling us about a group, and Dr. Pulugurta, you have to forgive me, but I didn't get the name of the group. Or on 2016, you mentioned that was trying to come up with an initiative about transit fare. I'm sorry, it wasn't just transit, but it was multimodal. And then Mr. John Gales, he was also mentioning about this situation of incremental changes. So changes that we're expecting over the next 20 to 40 years down the road. And really that we need to be focusing on major renovations, particularly due to the upcoming automation of vehicles, so autonomous vehicles. And he was reminding us about how was the US, the transportation network in the 1920s or 100 years ago, and how it transformed and it shifted in a relatively small amount of time. And how perhaps with these changes in autonomy vehicles and technology, we could be seeing extreme changes in a very small amount of time. So anybody else from any other groups that would like to share some of those thoughts and comments, discussion during those individual sections?
Augustine, this is Bill Thunberg. We had some discussion in group 2, and the discussion was really brought up by local governments and the fact that they've been at the staff level have been, trying to utilize these particular smart growth planning mechanisms locally, and that there has been some demand, particularly from the bike ped folks, for some emphasis on higher densities and better amenities. We didn't get to talk about it too much, but one of the things that appeared to me to be obvious, and anybody's welcome to jump in and say their piece on this, is that government, it seems like that everybody's relying on government to do everything with regards to enhanced mobility and planning. And there's certain things that government certainly should be responsible for. But it was apparent that there may be a rift between what's believed at the staff level and what the political leaders might be willing to endorse. And it may be something that needs to be discussed later on. And there was no discussion about industry or economic development or whatever insisting or advocating for certain types of things. So we may want to explore the roles that the various stakeholders have, and the dependence on government to lead might not be the right place to go.
Can I say something to that end?
Please.
I absolutely agree and appreciate what he said. One thing that I was trying to say in our breakout group before we got cut off is really the attempts that we've started to make with business in the way of traffic demand management, because if we really want the private sector to get on board, it's got to be something that makes sense for them, right? So how do we position mobility as a key enabler for economic mobility, not just at the government level, but how do we, I'll say, sell, if you will, to our local businesses the ways in which increasing mobility can actually drive their bottom line. And I think that until we do that, we'll continue as government to be pushed out front to drive the change.
That's some really, really good feedback from both. We really appreciate that. And I want you all to know that there are several folks from our team that are taking incredible notes from these discussions, and we will work together to dissect and move forward. And I want to highlight something before we take a couple other comments and move forward is those 5 key areas of innovation are obviously all correlate to each other in some way, shape, or form. So when you develop a policy that enables a program, which then encourages the ability to embrace emerging technologies, you find a way to pay for it, and then you implement it somehow. And so there's this life cycle of implementing some type of strategy or overarching initiative throughout what we're discussing today. And so what you just said between the two of you was perfect to kind of start to understand some of the overarching underlying challenges and opportunities that exist in the region for us to consider implementing and looking at different policy or strategy considerations for CRTPO and its regional partners. So thank you both for that feedback. Really, really great information. Is there anybody else from their discussion groups that has some good key points that they'd like to highlight to a larger group?
Yeah, Adam, this is Mark Boggs. I can talk for a little bit about our Group 5 if you'd like.
Yes, sir.
Okay, a couple of key points. We really picked up on the transit fare collection as a spin-off point, and then went in some interesting directions after that. I think the key point that was made there on fare collection, Mike Manis, I think, was saying that this had been part of their Smart Cities, Charlotte Smart Cities initiative a few years ago. And his real takeaway there, I think, was, while it got a lot of traction, it was recognized that that's a regional initiative and not just a study area initiative. And I think that came through in some other comments. Joe Boss was also stressing the idea that whatever the technologies and the innovations, it'll be critical to get all of the key stakeholders, players at the table, not just transportation and land use. Been a lot of focus here about those, but he specifically mentioned the utilities companies, Duke Energy, as it gets into autonomous vehicles, 5G as it gets critical and things like that. So that was a really important point. And then Jim Trogdon made the point that I think I've heard working with him in the past before, but it's important not just to understand what the issues are, but begin looking at those initiatives in different ways. And his key item there, I think, was let's be sure that we're looking in 3 dimensions and not just in 2 dimensions as new technologies come online, that'll be important to success.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. We have time for just one more set of comments from one of the groups.
This is Eric Zavarro with Group 1.
Yes, sir.
Our discussion kind of centered around breaking down silos in the region, you know, and the need for some kind of unifying body, whether that's a regional authority to kind of bring all the groups together, working together to set the policies, and then integrate those new innovative and technologies groups that will benefit everyone in the region. We also talked about, you know, current policies, building upon those, or starting from anew. And I mentioned that, you know, I'm involved with the Charlotte planning with the comp plan and UDO and all of the other things that we're embarking upon. And I think those aren't finished, but they're great examples of new plans using smart growth and, you know, really trying to integrate the plan beyond just the city of Charlotte, and thinking beyond and trying to work as a region as well at the same time working locally. So I think that would be a great, you know, beginning to start integrating into maybe a more regional foundation that we can incorporate other plans as well. But I think without that authority that's binding everybody together, I think we're kind of going to still be siloed. So I think that's an important key part of it.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for that feedback and from your group. That is greatly appreciated. I know by myself as well as all the members of the CRTPO team. And so for all those other groups that didn't necessarily get a chance to highlight their thoughts and feedback, if you wouldn't mind maybe placing those in the chat box, if you feel so inclined to, or we can follow up with our team representatives to make sure that we capture those details and then double check with those that are part of the group if we need to clarify anything further. So we do want to keep moving on. So with that, I want to move on to our next area of innovation, which is that of programming. And we have two subject matter experts. One you've already heard of, but the first one's going to be Atifa Abad, and Maureen Lewis-Adams will also present as well. So Atifa or Ati, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Can we do a sound check, video check?
Hear you and see you.
Awesome, thank you. Well, hello everyone. My name is Atia Abad. I'm with Atkins, ITS analyst working on several emerging technologies in the past few years. So the example that we've chosen to share with you today regarding innovation in programming is the Las Vegas Gomet project. Starting with a brief introduction to the project, this project is planned to be implemented in the Las Vegas Medical District. The mobility issues of this project is addressing as it relates to our Beyond77 workshop here today, and as Adam addressed those areas earlier in the presentation, are safety, mode choice, innovation, network connectivity, congestion, and transportation integration. So what we want to expand on a little further is the innovation in the programming of this project was really the approach in programming of the different technologies that will be utilized that are fully in a fully integrated manner. So the solutions that are not always necessarily integrated, one of the examples is that this project is developing a program for smart interactive transit shelters. So in programming for these smart interactive transit shelters, both real-time traveler information and wayfinding information are integrated into a single platform that will be installed at the smart hubs throughout the district to provide the users with real-time and wayfinding information. Another example, in addressing the pedestrian safety issues, pedestrian detection systems have been utilized that not only detect pedestrians, but also provide information such as counts, locations, and severity of the incidents, if applicable. And this is programmed to be integrated with the connected vehicle infrastructure that is planned to be implemented throughout the district, which brings us to my last point here, the discussion of the innovation regarding the data hubs and analytics that the project has utilized. This is really the piece that will bring everything together as far as data collection, analytics, and utilization. And what's even more important is that it will provide the Las Vegas Medical District with the required foundations of being a mini smart city and also being integrated into a bigger smart city platform in the future. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we briefly addressed the specific challenges that this innovative approach in programming is going to address, but to discuss the specifics, one of the issues with the district was the availability of ADA compliant transit in the Las Vegas Mobility District. The other one is the increasing pedestrian safety issue due to the higher percentage of mobility impaired pedestrians. Limited wayfinding and traveler information for all the users, future limitations of availability of car parking together with their forecasted growth in demand, which is definitely one of the challenges that we're facing here with our project, and one of the goals that we're trying to, one of the areas that we're trying to address. And then the last one is the lack of connected transit network. So in the next slide, we want to look at how the Las Vegas Gomet project is going to address those challenges and achieve those goals. So starting with local partnership, it will help improve local partnership, breaking down those silos that we are experiencing in several areas. And I remember Adam and I were talking, the reality is that most of these challenges are common challenges between the areas that we're focusing on. The other item that we wanted to discuss today is the improved access to local medical providers. Congestion, obviously, as we said, is a problem, and considering the forecasted growth, it would have been an even bigger problem in the near future. So with access improvements in the area, the medical district will ensure the medical providers have easy and smooth access to the facilities all around the district. Providing smart real-time travel information that is integrated into wayfinding information, which is a very innovative approach in integrating those emerging technologies. And then all of this will set the foundation for integration into a smart city and IoT platforms. And having the foundation will definitely make the transition a lot smoother. For my closing remarks, I just wanted to quickly highlight the lessons learned from the project. Again, going back to the integration component, integrating multiple emerging technology programs and solutions will not only help us address current challenges, but also prepares the foundation of a smarter, more connected, more innovative corridor, and setting a national example for other states and DOTs in the area or in the nation. And our objective today is to apply this methodology to our corridor in identifying and integrating several programs and projects that we are already planning on implementing to improve safety and mobility and stakeholder partnerships and promote innovation in data scale. That's all I had, Adam.
Thank you, Auntie. I appreciate that. And before we jump over to Maureen, I do want to throw out a quick reminder to everybody. When we talk about the word programming and innovation in programming, you heard a lot of overlap in terms of concepts and what Auntie just presented, which is great because it shows you the correlation between different factors we're talking about today. And when I'm talking about innovation in programming, it relates to the process that we or a region can design to develop a process and a set of steps to reach a certain goal. And so to kind of put that in context, I know one of those examples, Eric, I see you on my screen, so I'm going to highlight a program that's kind of being looked at by Sustain Charlotte, which is a circular economy and the zero waste program that you're focusing on with the city and other parts of our region. And so that right there in and of itself is a very large program where you've created steps to meet certain goals throughout its duration, which could be forever, we hope. So that is what we mean by innovation in programming, is to think about what types of programming can exist for mobility-related initiatives. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Marie Lewis-Adams to talk about first mile, last mile transit programs.
Thanks, Adam. Sorry, here we go. Great. So yes, I will talk a little bit about some of the programs that exist across the country in order to kind of bridge that first and last mile between, high capacity transit and users' origins and destinations. So, these first mile, last mile programs, this is actually something that started coming up in our small group discussion, which was great. Lots of agencies, lots of regions across the country are, looking at different region-wide programs to kind of address this issue of how do you really get, folks to use transit by actually being able to complete their trip. So, this also touches on network connectivity, the mode choices that are available to us, and the different innovations that we can choose from, because there really has been a lot of progress in this area over the past 10 years. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges on the first mile, last mile side, first just a little, context. When we're talking about first mile and last mile transit, one of the biggest challenges is that, this is often the most expensive part of the trip because when we're talking about door-to-door service, there's not always a huge volume of people making that exact same trip. So it can get very expensive, when we talk about kind of just being able to bridge that gap. It's much easier. It makes everybody's lives a lot easier when land uses are supportive of transit, because when land uses are clustered around high capacity transit, that means it's much easier to kind of make that final bridge that final gap, because things aren't so dispersed. But in a spread out area like many regions in the U.S. is a little bit more of a challenge to actually get people to their final destinations in a cost-effective manner and a time-effective manner, because keeping those wait times short, remembering that we're always sort of competing against car travel. If you can get somewhere quickly on a high-capacity bus or a train, but it takes you 20 minutes to complete your trip, suddenly transit is not going to be a very attractive choice. So managing costs, managing wait times, things like that are very important. So, from a programming perspective, agencies are just looking at, different kinds of programs that they can implement in order to most effectively bridge that gap. So some of the options include shuttles, they're sort of demand responsive flexible routes, bike sharing, ride sharing, car sharing, park and ride options. These are all different programs. Some agencies have implemented multiple types of programs. So when you think about it, in terms of setting up a program, really looking at your market in terms of, who's using the service, what is the land use like, what, is the demographic like, to understand which of these programs might be the most appropriate in each environment. And kind of back to what Ati was talking about, IT integration is crucial to work that into these programs, because if you can use the same platform, the same technology platform to plan your transit trip, and you can also use it to, say, reserve your bike share or reserve your ride share. It's all integrated together. There's a lot of work on the back end that needs to go into that, but that just makes it a much more seamless process and makes it much more likely that folks will actually use it. Next slide. So, there's lots of different variations of these programs. So I just wanted to kind of highlight a few and how they've worked. Bike sharing, Sacramento RT has a kind of a comprehensive bike share program where they have bikes you can rent at stations where it's all kind of integrated into their technology platforms as well. This works really well in markets where they have, their downtown is fairly compact. There's a few different colleges, I think, on their lines, and so where things are in relatively close proximity, folks are likely to work well with the bike system, so that's a good option there for them. Other areas where it's more commute-based, where the distances are a little longer, several agencies have partnered with rideshare services like Uber or Lyft. Including Charlotte, there are a few stations where Charlotte Cats has partnered with Lyft to kind of subsidize travel on rideshare in order to complete folks' trips. There are a few different examples of that. Trinity Metro in Fort Worth, Hart in Tampa, where real integration with the transportation network companies, the TNCs, has been very successful in bridging the gaps especially in lower density areas. Even car sharing has become increasingly popular. I know LA Metro has a car sharing program at certain stations, and this is again looking at your market. Where is car sharing going to be, the best option for your trip, where folks can actually, share different cars that are parked at the station. You can book it all in the same platform, and in areas where parking is not as much of a concern, where really doing a bike or a ride share is not as good an option, car sharing can be a good option too. And many areas are implementing these kind of mobility hubs where multiple different kinds of services are available. And we got bike lanes, potential bike share, potential car share integrated together where folks can really kind of complete their trip in one location. So lots of different options there, and sort of implementation paradigms in terms of how they're all programmed and integrated together.
Great, thank you, Ati and Marie. And with that, Theo, we are ready to go ahead and break out into our second breakout group to talk about programming.
Okay.
And welcome back, everybody. Hopefully those were some very good conversations. So I'd like to start maybe with Bob Cook this time and see if he or other folks from his group had some interesting feedback from this breakout session.
We did. I think, let me get to some of my notes here, Adam.
Sure.
Yeah, no, we had a good conversation. I think I learned a little bit. I learned that one can live in Houston and survive without a car. Mr. Hillman mentioned that he lived there for about 3 years without a car and commented on using the bike share program down there. So if I take nothing away from this workshop, I've learned something new today based upon that. So Erica Martin talked a little bit about how she would like to see how some of the programs like bike share and so forth can be utilized in more suburban areas, or even and Jessica Stewart from Iredell County was talking about some more rural trips. She was talking about the commuting patterns within Iredell County where there's about an equal balance in terms of workers leaving the county to go to work and folks coming into the county to go to work. And seeing how those some of the tools we talked about during the prior to the breakouts, how they might be able to be employed in that setting. And we talked a little bit about the links with ICATS and coming into Charlotte and linking up with CAT service. So I think a good conversation about the examples that were provided.
Very good. Thank you, Bob. How about Neil Burke in your group?
Well, I got nominated to be the spokesman. I should say appointed. The three main concepts is the innovation caused by the internet is ongoing and is not standing still, and we have no idea where it's taking us. But we can't let our infrastructure fall behind. It's got to make sure we keeps up. It does us no good to know how to do transit if we have to stand at a bus stop without a cover during a rainstorm. And the big elephant in the room is funding. How are we going to fund all these improvements? And we're at the mercy of the state General Assembly.
Very good.
Did I cover everything, Neil?
Yes, Dr. Mike, that was a good summation.
Awesome. Thank you both. Any other folks want to chime in and provide some input or feedback from their group discussion?
Hey, Adam, this is Dean, group number 6.
Yes, sir.
We honestly need another 10 minutes. We were really just getting rolling with some good discussion. You know, some of the things that have worked from a programming standpoint in Charlotte are the scooter system, and the user numbers show that it has been used quite heavily. In fact, I think Eric was mentioning that it kind of replaced the bike share program that was underway. So that's something that's working well. Some things I think that intrigue us are these micro hubs. It really was discussed earlier in the previous segment, but building these small micro hubs around to shorten that first mile, last mile could play a key role. Complete Streets, of course, plays a key role with its allowance for bikes and pedestrians. What I think has been lacking in all of this, a lot of this is infrastructure, and I think one of the things that we really started talking about was having to do with safety. I think there's a lot of people out there, myself included, who like to ride bikes, but with a 3-inch shoulder just don't feel comfortable. That's the reality, and especially in a very car-dependent region, it's really difficult to convince folks that, you know, you ought to put your car aside and get on your bike. So, you know, unless we start, so this is, you know, we can design our way out of this by improving our design standards to allow for, you know, more multimodal solutions on our roadways is one area that we could improve on. Again and again, we see this over and over again, but really choice and design. It's not, there's not only not one mobility we need to account for, it's we need choice and design, and design choice into our solutions.
Very good. Thank you, Dean. And one last person I do want to call him is Tony Lathrop. I want to hear some thoughts and feedback from you, sir. Tony, I think you might be on mute still.
How about now? Can you hear
There
me?
we go. Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. We had a spirited discussion about last mile and autonomous shuttles and micro mobility, and it really focused on the questions of where it would be appropriate, and we concluded that there are many nodes across this region where both shuttles, autonomous shuttles, and micro mobility options such as scooters would be appropriate, and with particular discussions of the Cassie autonomous shuttle that was tested up in Raleigh and at NC State, as well as scooter micro mobility and other things like that. And so then it focused, our discussion switched to access, and I think that was alluded to in some other discussions earlier today, but how folks who can't just plop down a credit card and get a Bird account can get access to these mobility options, and what are innovative ways that agencies, transit agencies, can come up with, for folks to get, special cards and special access like that. And lastly, we just noted that the area of this study is so big that that there would just be many from Statesville down to Rock Hill and 6 miles wide. There'd be many areas where this would be appropriate, and probably even have to tailor solutions to different nodes. But we did have a very robust discussion. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. And I do want to touch on, there's been a lot of great feedback that we've been hearing about mobility hubs and integration of micromobility on different scales. The Connect Beyond Initiative regional transit plan effort that's going through the COG, we are coordinating with them, and they're looking at a visionary perspective of what mobility hubs could and should look like throughout the greater Charlotte region. And we will coordinate with them closely throughout the rest of our study process and theirs on how we can complement efforts where we may be able to propose some strategies and policies or programs to then enable the vision that they come up with for those mobility hubs to then start to move forward into some actionable items in the near future. So I wanted everybody to be aware of that. So Augustine, with that in mind, we did schedule a 10-minute break for all of us, and we certainly want to encourage those to hang out with us because we're having some great dialogue to keep us going. And so with that being said, Augustine, are we still comfortable with taking that 10-minute break?
Absolutely. I think everyone will appreciate that. So let's come back at 3:05. So let's give 12 more minutes. I will be here for a couple more minutes. I do need to take a quick break. If anybody else have any questions or comments. So again, let's be back 3:05.
We'll keep the lines open.
Well, folks, welcome back. It is 3:05. So we're going to resume back to the agenda, item number 8, continue with the innovation in emerging technologies.
Awesome.
Tyler? Unless, Adam, you have anything?
No, I just want to say thank you again, and I'm glad that everybody stuck with us. And I know that we might have a few other people joining us back in here that may have had to bounce out for a little call or whatnot during that break. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our two subject matter experts in this area for today. That would be Tyler Bray and Courtney Weeder.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Adam, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
All right. Appreciate everybody taking time out today to be a part of this workshop. It's been a great discussion so far, and I look forward to the rest. Just kind of wanted to set the stage just a little bit. We could have gone in a million different directions with emerging technologies. They're happening fast and furious. And so we'll just talk about a few of them today, but I'm sure that our breakout discussions will emerge with a lot of things. The first one we wanted to kind of talk about a little bit is this idea of smart pavement. One of the things that the world and especially transportation is dealing with right now is the amount of data that you can accumulate and that is available, and what do you do with that data? How do you gather it? What types do you gather? And so one of the things that is being looked at is how we can use existing infrastructure to leverage that data and gather that data. And one of the ways that they're looking at, you can go back to the previous slide, Adam, but one of the ways that they're looking to do that is with this idea of smart pavement. Putting necessary sensors and other types of things into segments of blocks of either pavement or concrete that you can interlink together and utilize that information in a variety of ways, helping, as shown on the slide there, with safety and road conditions, innovation, and congestion. Okay, Adam. So how do we use those innovations to leverage that data? Well, if you think about the many different things and data elements that you can grab and use and how you can use that, we can look at areas where there might be high crash location implications where we have one segment of the roadway, maybe even a short segment that has a lot of crashes, but we want to know what is actually going on with those vehicles in relation to speed, direction, weight, all these different types of data elements that we can gather. Same with congested intersections, monitoring traffic, and also real-time pavement conditions and possible traffic counts. Embedded with this type of technology, sensors in the roadway, we can be able to understand what's happening in the pavement in real time and be able to leverage our funding and other assets to benefit the transportation system as best we can in the most efficient way we can. Looking forward down the line to the future, some of it is here, but others will take some time to get implemented in this arena. The implications for connected and autonomous vehicle communications. We hear a lot about vehicle V2X and different sort of technologies and connections, but if we have it in the roadway, the capabilities and things that could come with the next 10 to 20 to 30 years could be enormous and very beneficial. Electric vehicle wireless charging, just an idea. One of the things that was talked about with smart pavement is the ability to charge as you're driving. I know there's electric, you can do wireless charging if the car is parked, but talking about implementing that on a wider scale as you're using the facility. And then leveraging new revenue streams. We've talked a lot about and we'll continue to talk about that issue as we move forward today, but looking at options if there are other companies that want to put 5G or other sort of technologies into the roadway to benefit them, maybe that's something that they would be willing to pay for, and then the cost of putting in new pavement or improving could be offset in that way. So just some of the high level ideas and implications for this type of improvement. Next slide. And so one of the companies called Integrated Roadways, it started doing some work in this space, and one of their projects was in Brighton Boulevard in Denver, Colorado. They installed 4 prefabricated pavement slabs, and to gather weight, speed, and direction of vehicles that were traversing these pavement slabs. This project, this sort of technology with this company was is very in its infancy, and so they were just showcasing exactly how this technology would work, how the data would be gathered, and then also crossing it with video evidence to ensure that the data that was being gathered was accurate, that the information that you're receiving in real time was what was actually happening on the ground, and then that data could be used down the line, trying to identify how traffic moves, either from a safety, congestion, or a number of other aspects throughout the transportation system. So with that, I'm turn it over to Courtney Weeder to continue talking about integrated corridor management.
Thanks, Tyler. Can you guys hear me okay? Thanks. So talking about integrated corridor management, ICM, it's really just the integrated management of freeway, transit, arterial, parking systems, signal systems within a corridor, and it's using those ITS technologies and innovative practices. So it's really the management of a corridor as opposed to the management of these individual transportation networks. It's so like there's often underutilized capacity parallel roadways within an area, and using this concept of ICM, there's ways to better leverage these underutilized roadways to reduce congestion. So ICM is really based on two fundamental concepts. It's active management, so monitoring, assessing performance of the system, and then dynamically implementing actions in response to the fluctuations of demand of these roadways. And then the integration piece is collaboration with local agencies, stakeholders, different partners, and coordinating that. It's also promoting information sharing and coordinating operations. So an example of this is NCDOT's Traffic Management Center is really focused on developing these sorts of plans for large construction and work zone projects. So they develop a plan. So if a major incident were to occur along an ICM, one of these corridors, then travelers would be advised by dynamic message signs and through 511 of these alternate routes. So these plans that they develop are pre-developed in the planning stages. So while a construction project is going on, these dynamic message boards and the changeable message boards will already have these plans. So if an incident occurs, then an operator will be prompted to display this message. So another coordination piece of that is they may utilize an alternate route that has signals on it. So they may want to increase the length of the signal times to flush out traffic if they're routing traffic and with an incident occurring on a major interstate to another route, then they'll have these signal times updated for that scenario. And another scenario is a great emerging technology to incorporate in this is adaptive signal timing. So if this were to occur and then you route traffic to an alternate route, then the adaptive signal timings will automatically adjust the signal timings for this kind of occurrence. Next slide, please. So ICM really addresses traffic congestion, incident management, and it focuses on using reliable real-time data for those road closures, work zones, incidents. And it also it is good for improving route planning and also for freight mobility as well as just passenger vehicles. So it's really trying to look at this coordinated aspect of different things and how to utilize these different systems to improve traffic congestion. Next slide, Adam. Thanks. So these achieved outcomes are, like I said, improved congestion and safety. So a lot of times when a traffic incident occurs, then there's also opportunity for a second incident. So when you have an ICM in place and you reroute traffic to another route, then the secondary incident is greatly reduced and then traffic flow is restored. There's also an aspect of integrating just incident management data. So anticipating incident duration. So using these technologies to anticipate incident duration, roadway clearance times when an incident does occur. Also trying to figure out those alternate routes as well for an incident. It's also a shift in modal choice. So if an incident does occur, then or if there's heavy congestion, then it's how do you get that message out to the users of the roadway, and maybe that will alter their mode choice. And then also the piece of coordination and collaboration is crucial with the ICMs. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Courtney and Tyler. So those are just two examples of how emerging technologies can impact and enhance mobility throughout a certain location or an entire region. And I know that many of you have ideas and thoughts from around your travels and experiences working in this area to have these discussions. So with that, Theo, I would love for you to, again, break us out into small groups so we can continue these discussions around emerging technologies. And welcome back, everybody. Hope you guys had some good discussions. And we'll go ahead and start with Judy's group. I don't know if Judy, if you pinpointed a presenter to discuss some highlights.
I did not, but I will let Tyler or Mark do the feedback.
Perfect.
So is that
All right, unmuted. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Sorry, it took me a while to find that button. Adam, I think we had some good discussion, kind of talking about how these different sort of emerging technologies could be implemented and get people more comfortable with them, to not be so scared of an autonomous vehicle if a Tesla is on autopilot driving down the road. And we also had a lot of discussion about funding. I think that's a theme across all of our segments today, about these are great, and these ideas seem to provide immense benefit, but how are we going to pay for it? And I think that's look forward to the continued breakout discussions to discuss that even further.
Excellent. Mark, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right. How about Jarrell? Folks from Jarrell's group.
Yes. 1 second. So our group was just talking about possible partnerships with utilities such as Duke Energy on reaching a point of being able to get the integrated corridor management strategy implemented. Also similar to what was just spoken, sustainable source to fund everything. Even though you can be able to acquire or be able to get the infrastructure in place, how are you going to maintain it? It has to be cost effective. Also, another point was, even though you can gain all this data or retrieve all this data from these technological entities, is it useful? How is it being used? What's the purpose of it? And basically, would we be able to understand all this data we're gaining from it? Because a whole bunch of data being obtained from smart pavement or integrated corridor, if it has no purpose, it's just data.
Gotcha. All right. And how about folks from Augustine Rodriguez's group?
Hi. Go ahead, Rob. I was going to say Rob.
This is Rob Illman. Yeah, we had a good discussion, and kind of one of my first or threshold questions is it being used? And we have examples, and it is apparently being used in Cornelia. They have about 7 or 8, I think, traffic lights that are utilizing adaptive technology to adjust traffic patterns as perhaps you get overflow from I-77 at exit 28. And it seems like it's a partnership between it is definitely a public-private partnership between North Carolina DOT and I don't know what the private sector entity or partner is, but seems that it's reportedly it's working. And so it'll be interesting from my perspective to see how that's rolled out. Sort of to the point of funding, it seems, would be interested to know what the funding model is and, whether that model is feasible for, expansion and extension to other places, given the reported, that it's working. What came up in our group was also related to public, the relationship between public and private partnerships. It's clear that and this is very true, the private sector is way ahead on this, principally because there's an economic incentive and they're making, money. Or there are ways for them to monetize, the technology. but clearly there is also the entity of, how do you roll that out within a geographic jurisdiction or a city, a town, and what does that partnership, look like? And is the partnership enabling or stifling innovation? And then last, really just to repeat a comment that was just previously made, was that of information collection, analysis, and use, and how all that relates to privacy. It's no doubt that some guy with a big computer at MIT, my alma mater, can crank through that data and define patterns. But then the question is, well, how is it used, and what are the boundaries around privacy, and is that kept intact? And
excellent. Very good feedback, and I think I'm starting to hear a trend from these discussions is that it's almost regardless of what technology implemented, it's more of how do we manage it, and how do we govern it, and how do we partner on it. And so those are some recurring themes that I'm starting to hear, and that will certainly work with CRTPO and its partners to work through, but almost letting the market also determine what technologies enter our arena in every 5 to 10 year timeframes. So as long as we develop that shelf and operate in, there'll be the opportunity for enhanced mobility on so many different scales using technology. So really appreciate that feedback, and I believe the next section is what we're all looking forward to as well. So Ben Stein, you're going to be Mr. Popular here when we jump into talking about innovation through funding concepts. With that, Ben, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Well, obviously nothing like having the pressure on, since in every session I've had so far, the issue of funding has come up as a question. So don't worry, I promise I'll let you down. So next slide, perfect, next slide. So the first thing I wanted to point out is we are not alone in the issue of funding as a question. In fact, I've never seen anything quite like this, what's going on in North Carolina at this moment. Right now, the NC First, which is North Carolina DOT, has a commission that's looking at it. Charlotte, as you can see, has a task force that's looking at funding. There's the Chamber of Commerce has recently issued a report that is, as you can see, through sustainable and diversified revenue streams. And then NC Moves. So this is a crowded space because to many people, this is the critical space. Next slide, please.
Really quick, Ben, I do want to add to our stakeholders that received a PDF of the slides yesterday from Augustine.
Oh, right.
Every one of those images is linked to the resource and website for more information if you want to learn more, just so you're aware of that information. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay. So this is a pretty well-trod ground because everybody's looking for the magic bullet. An important point here, the comment was brought up about Pennies for Progress, which I'll talk about shortly, and the fact that York County in South Carolina has a local option that it's using a sales tax for. North Carolina does, in fact, have something not exactly like Pennies for Progress, and we'll talk, as I said, but it does have a regional or local by county option to impose a sales tax, an additional sales tax for public transit. And as you can see from this map, that's a pretty popular and pretty heavily used option here. And there can be, based upon what's going on in the state, there's a 0.25% for sales tax, and then there's a 0.5% sales tax. And you'll see that 2 counties, Orange and Durham, have both the 1/4 and the 0.5% sales tax, which is interesting. And Mecklenburg County, of course, already has the 0.5% on for transit. So there is a regional or local sales tax already in effect in North Carolina for a transportation purpose, maybe not the one you want. Okay, next slide, please. So before I go too much further, I think it's important, and hopefully everybody here understands this, but just in case, funding versus finance. Financing mechanisms are used to spread costs over time and generally to accelerate project construction. Examples of items that can help you finance a project are TIFIA, which is a US DOT program that provides extremely favorable financing for about 1/3 of a project cost, but it needs to be a pretty big project, and there's some very specific requirements to obtain that money. Municipal bonds are quite popular and quite heavily used, of course. And of course, that's what a municipal bond simplistically does, is you can take your future revenues bond against them, pay interest, and receive the money today and build your project today. So that's a tremendous advantage of municipal bonds. In the United States, those bonds are generally tax exempt, which gives them very favorable borrowing and low rates for the governments that borrow against them. Public-private partnerships and concessions, have a fair amount of familiarity with those. You have one on I-77 in Charlotte right now, I believe, where a private concessionaire has come in and has agreed upfront to pay for the improvements, and then there has to be a repayment source. Often it's tolls, but it's not always tolls. Here in Denver, where I am, they're using sales tax to pay back a concessionaire on a rail line. Funding, as opposed to financing, is the actual underlying revenue source that will actually pay ultimately for the vehicle's construction. Motor fuel tax is a good example of that. Obviously, a sales tax is an example of that. Motor vehicle fees are a current example of that under North Carolina law. So again, financing is, I'll make this very simple. If you have the funding, there's an innovative person out there who will find you a financing mechanism that will work. There are a lot of motivated investment bankers out there who will get that taken care of. But funding is a governmental problem that is a whole nother matter. Next slide, please. So a current example of a financing tool. Interestingly enough, in Charlotte, North Carolina, on their November ballot, you're going to have a bond issue for improvements. They're seeking $102 million for street improvements. There are other elements to this bond issuance for housing and some other capital improvements, but $102 million for specific highway improvements that are going to be listed. Important point in this case, this is a financing tool. This is the municipal bond because they are not, you'll notice, this is directly from the city website, the financing bonds for these costs are included in the current city budget. No additional property tax increase will be required to pay for these bonds. So again, they're taking a future property tax revenue, using it to pay for an improvement today. It's not a bad idea, but it's not a new funding source. Here in Colorado, in 1999, in the year 2000, we passed an enormous bond issuance for highway improvements, mostly on I-25 in Colorado Springs and Denver. And we used that as a financing tool to do over $1 billion worth of projects. However, that meant that the Colorado Department of Transportation's annual budget, the first thing it did was subtract $167 million per year from its current budget each subsequent year in order to repay those bonds over a 20-year period. So bonds are not free. They have to be paid for. Next slide, please. I mentioned on that earlier slide, NC First, the Commission of the Department of Transportation. This list here is a list of all the different potential funding sources they are exploring at this time. The existing motor fuel tax, the North Carolina highway use tax, motor vehicle registration fees, hybrid electric vehicle fees and taxes, tolls and fares, mileage-based user fees, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, vehicle subscription or ride-sharing services, and how should they pay their share, vehicle or statewide property tax. Colorado, in fact, does have a statewide vehicle property tax. However, in the state of Colorado, it's 100% devoted to the school districts. So, carbon tax, there's a lot of talk about varying degrees of pollution from different vehicles. Carbon tax is a way to, based upon emissions, to charge for that. And sales tax on auto parts and services, which is of course currently part of your general sales tax, but since those are related to vehicles, should that be segregated and used for transportation? Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to talk for a moment about mileage-based user fees, also called VMT. A mileage-based user fee, or it's also called a road usage charge, is an alternative, generally seen as an alternative to the motor fuels tax, although it could theoretically be implemented in conjunction with one. But generally it's spoken of as an alternative. Under a mileage-based user fee system, the driver pays a fee based on the number of miles driven. This is mostly looked at because as vehicles are becoming much more fuel efficient and electric cars and hybrid cars are coming out, the amount of motor fuel tax that's collected per mile traveled on the system is going down. And therefore, the motor fuels tax is generally seen as an unsustainable method of paying for a user fee. Next slide, please. There are many options for mileage-based user fees on how to track them. Electronic collection of data, which can be done either through a smartphone, a radio frequency, an RFID chip or reader. There are plugins to the computer in your car that can report. You could go to an inspection station and have it manually read. That's a pretty inefficient but feasible way to do it. There are ways to do it at the gas pump where you would come to the gas pump and you'd have some sort of the gas pump would talk to your car, and before you could pump the gas, it would ask you to download your mileage information. And self-reporting, where they would expect people to just either estimate their annual mileage per year or simply send in a form on a periodic basis. Fee setting. The fees can be set uniformly. In other words, a mile traveled in Raleigh is no different than a mile traveled in Charlotte, or in a rural area out by Camp Lejeune. A standard set fee has many advantages, the main one of which is privacy, because then you don't need to know where or when the mile was traveled. However, you can use the pricing to meet policy goals by varying the pricing to encourage the use of alternate transportation, improve travel time reliability, manage congestion. For example, if I-77 is too crowded at certain times of day, you would charge much higher fees for a mile on I-77 than on a different road. Next slide, please. Mileage-based user fees have been talked about for a very long time. They have not been implemented anywhere at this point. Oregon is the state that has the most advanced study of it. Here in Colorado, we've done a pilot project that has been completed and was reasonably successful. North Carolina is joining in on one pilot on the Northeast, in the Eastern Corridor, which it's going to be in shortly. And you can see this idea has been talked about more and more. Next slide, please. Okay. The rates that you would need to use, assuming a flat per mile fee, which is generally what's the most discussed model at this point because of the simplicity of it. Interestingly enough, the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce has actually calculated, conveniently for me, the right dollar amounts. To replace the current NC motor fuel tax would be 1.8 cents per mile. However, if you wanted to robustly improve the system and eliminate the current motor fuel tax, you would need something, depending on the level of improvements you want, between 3 and 5 cents per mile. And a very important note, administrative costs are in addition to this, and depending on the system used, it could add 10 to 20%. Unfortunately, no one has identified a methodology for collecting mileage-based user fees that will be quite as simple and easy to administer as existing motor fuel tax, which is paid by the distributors before the fuel goes out to the fuel stations, and is extremely inexpensive and efficient to run. Next slide, please. Okay. So the critical issues that mostly come up when you're talking about motor MBUF, what about the state line? If you have someone who lives in York County, South Carolina, which is an area of great interest, I guess, if you live in the Charlotte metro area, if your car is registered in South Carolina and you do your driving in North Carolina because of your daily commute, to whom do you pay the funding? Do you get a free ride when you pay out of state? Or if you drive out of state and you have a flat fee and no location data, do you end up paying to your local government in South Carolina for miles even though you drove them in North Carolina? On the other hand, if you simply have a flat fee per mile, there are no privacy issues. There are people who are deeply concerned and feel it's a government imposition or intrusion if you need to know the time of day and location of the miles traveled. For one thing, if you're doing that, it's very easy to adjust the fee based upon where you are and when you're traveling it. The other is that the government, of course, will know where your car is. Now, it doesn't have to be real time. I believe this data would probably be downloaded in periodic downloads. However, the government would overall know when and where your car was traveling. There's a great deal of concern about that. The alternative, of course, is if you simply do flat fee per mile, you don't have to worry about that, but you have to accept some level of inaccuracy in what you're paying and when. So these are the biggest two dilemmas probably affecting the issue. One comment I would make to that is that commercial vehicles don't have a privacy concern because by definition they're commercial vehicles, and one option or to consider would be to implement this over time, starting with commercial vehicles, for example, as a phased implementation. So next slide, please. So now to what everybody's been waiting for all day, I believe, Pennies for Progress program in South Carolina. Took a look at it. I've given you the statutory citation where it is authorized by the South Carolina legislature. It authorizes the use of sale and use taxes or tolls as a revenue for transportation facilities. Counties, based on a county-wide vote, are empowered to impose a sales and use tax of up to 1% to create new revenues to support the implementation of a specific project list or list of projects within a specified time frame. So this is different from the regional public transportation sales tax in North Carolina. And as best I can tell, South Carolina does not have a local option for a sales tax for public transit. However, I could be wrong about that. But if it is, certainly York County doesn't have it. I'm sure of that. Next slide, please. So a little history of the York County Pennies for Progress program. It has passed 4 measures, 97, 2003, 2011, and 2017. You can see here a list of projects that York County has paid for to improve. These are significant ones that they're highlighting. Next slide, please. And now you can see on this slide how much money that they've raised for their list of projects. 99 million, 173 million, 161 million, 277 million. And then you can see how much these sometimes they went over budget on some of these projects and had to use additional funding or obtain additional funding from other sources. That's what's in the other column. And then when the taxes have expired. So they've been able to do a combination of bond and pay-go funding to use this as a regional effort to improve matters. Now, obviously, it would take an act of the North Carolina legislature to allow a similar program in North Carolina in the Charlotte metropolitan area. Next slide, please. So one other quick comment I need to make about Pennies for Progress, and then I'll let everybody go to the breakout session. In Colorado, the discussion of allowing regional transportation authorities to impose sales taxes for this purpose has been discussed. And in fact, we have the authority in Colorado for regions to do that. El Paso County, which is where Colorado Springs is located, had over 10 years ago, did do a vote. It passed a sales tax with a specific list of projects, and it was for a 1% sales tax. 10 years later, they went back to the voters of the El Paso County. They passed another list of projects, and they continued the 1% sales tax to pay for it. It has been exceedingly successful for the El Paso County, Colorado Springs area. However, the state has tried several times to do statewide measures to increase funding for transportation. And the voters in El Paso County say, wait a minute. And they vote overwhelmingly against the statewide tax because they would have to pay their 1% sales tax for their regional one and the statewide sales tax. So there is a concern that if you allow regional sales taxes of this sort, that you will, for lack of a better term, the term we use in Colorado is balkanize the state. And the fact is that while your region desperately needs improvements in its region, your region also needs effective and good roads from your region to other metropolitan areas. And frankly, from the rural areas in and out of the metropolitan area as well. So that has been the big discussion point about regional funding mechanisms in Colorado. And I just thought I'd contrast that because I would point out that a regional sales tax mechanism may not be a panacea.
All right.
And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for those comments. And so before we do break out, Ben Stein has provided us a couple of different perspectives here to think about and to talk about. Remember, the definitions are provided in the slide sets between financing and funding that you have to reference if you need to. to aid in your discussions that we're about to break into. Remember, nothing is off the table. While it seems that there are so many different things that other groups are already doing to talk about funding initiatives, it could be simply as encouraging regional partners here in Charlotte to support any one of those that's moving forward in a solid effort, or if the option is to look at regional efforts, potentially is to also consider that in a comprehensive effort as well. So again, Theo, when you're ready, we'll go ahead and break out and we'll have some engaging discussions on funding concept innovations.
I am ready.
Perfect. And welcome back, everybody. Hope we had some great conversations about what funding concepts could and should look like here in the region. And so I will bounce around to some other folks that are leading some of these teams here. And so maybe we'll start with Gene Conti. Whoever was in with Gene Conti's group, would love to hear from you and some highlights from your discussion about funding concept innovation.
Adam, go ahead. You want me to go ahead, Augustine?
I was gonna ask David Hooper.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
For the lessons learned from the Pennies, he is the director of ARFATs in South Carolina. So I think he shared with us really good lessons learned and ideas and thoughts from the Pennies program in South Carolina.
Augustine, certainly happy to. You know, in our group, I touched on a couple of key points, maybe 3 or 4. One was, you know, just as a point of reference, the Pennies program has raised about $1 billion over 4 referendums or 20 years, and a couple of the key things that I think we've learned along the way. One is the importance of having very detailed cost estimates before you go out to the public. You know, it's important from a project management standpoint, of course, but it's important to maintain the public's confidence in the system, that if I give you my vote to do X, you will do Y. That kind of cause and effect relationship is very important in the public mind. A second thing that I think is important is that when you use a non-federal money, a local option sales tax, it effectively frees up the region's planning agencies from some of the procedural requirements at the federal level, as well as some state-based ranking criteria, so that if you want to align those resources with either targeted economic development objectives or other things, you have the freedom to do that in a way that with pure federal funds, you do not always. They don't always match up. Another is, you know, with the challenges at the state DOTs from a funding standpoint, you do have to be aware that when you raise money locally, you will probably hear some voices that want to incorporate more of a maintenance component. And I think this is particularly relevant to a growth area where they say, you know, if you build it, or if you don't build it, they can't come. So they say, we don't want to fund road capacity or new alignment or other things. And so you need to be prepared that you're probably going to have voices that talk about the maintenance component of it. And that's part of the process as well. I think overall, it can also assist in supplementing funding, which is, you know, on a grant-specific basis. We can't use federal to match federal, so we can't use our guide share funding that comes to the MPO. But if you've got a local option source of funding, you can normally leverage that on a grant-specific basis to get particular projects advanced, and that can make the difference in supplementing your budgetary resources on a targeted basis.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for that really good input. Really appreciate it. And just as a reminder, we've got several people taking notes, and so we're hearing this feedback, and we're going to take it and start to dissect and work with both all the partners involved with this project from a technical standpoint to see what strategies we can potentially develop, if applicable, for a regional funding concept of some sorts, or supporting what's going on the statewide or by statewide level. Bob Cook, checking with your group before we continue to the next section.
Okay, we had a very good conversation, Adam. We started out with the fact that we recognize that prayer might help the situation that North Carolina is in at the moment. So, we need all the help we can get. So why not go that route? But we talked about how, there are a lot of strategies out there. And what we need to do as a region is to really coalesce around 2, maybe 3 strategies that we really want to go with. So we have to make a determination as a region as to what do we want to do, which sounds logical, but there could be a lot of time spent figuring out what the best path is. But we've got to start doing that and probably doing it rather quickly. Start building support at the regional level. Determining what it is we can do right now under current legislation, but also long-term what we can do, but not just long-term. Thinking about a near-term strategy, a mid-term strategy, and then that long-term strategy as well, and really spend some time educating the public also. And then you did say that everything was on the table here, so here's a bit of a controversial one that came out that. Having CATS as a city department is not a good long-term strategy, and then it should be in the form of some other entity, an authority, something along those lines, and it should be endowed with bonding capacity as well. So a really good conversation with our group.
Very good. Thank you for that feedback, Bob. And to all others, if you have other additional ideas, either throw them in the chat box or send Augustine and myself a follow-up email post this conversation. We would love to keep hearing from you, as I'm sure that some great ideas came up with that. But I do want to keep us moving into our last section. I don't want to take up too much more of your time this afternoon because you've spent a considerable amount of your valuable time with us already. And we've heard some great feedback moving forward. So with that, I do want to go to our next and last section, and that is going to be the specific project implementation methods as well as specific infrastructure needs in our region. So I have 2 subject matter experts with us again. Ati Abad will again present to us, as well as Adam O'Brien. So Ati, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hello again. So for this part of the presentation, we are going to look at a example from Dubai Electric Vehicles Initiative project. We've chosen this project as an example to discuss the innovative approaches in project implementation, meaning that we have an emerging technology solution available to us, but how do we implement it in an innovative approach or manner? So again, starting with a brief introduction to the project, the Dubai Electric Vehicles Initiative was a planning project to perform a review of the state of the practice on electric vehicles to first of all assess the policy and legislative changes required to implement electric vehicles in the local area. Second was to assess the readiness of the infrastructure for electric vehicles. I've been hearing a lot in our discussions today regarding how, with all these great things that we want to do we have the sufficient infrastructure to implement them? So we're going to be looking at that in this project example. And then last but not least, to identify global goals to understand the specific actions required in achieving those goals. So these were the 3 focus areas that Dubai wanted to have with this project. The mobility issues that this project addressed as it relates to the Beyond77 project are safety, mode choice, innovation, land use, and transportation integration. So why are we looking at this example? Because we need to understand and acknowledge that even though a solution or a strategy may be innovative in its core, we still need to be smart and creative about identifying those specific action items to help a successful implementation of an emerging technology solution. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before looking at this specific approach, let's quickly just review the challenges that Dubai was trying to address. The slide that you see on the screen that provides with a list of challenges ranked in 3 different categories of very high significance, and moderate significance. But right now, we only want to discuss the challenges as they relate to our project today. So number one, lack of sufficient infrastructure was the biggest drive, high cost and limited range of electric vehicles. And because of this lack of sufficient infrastructure, the limited transportation and mobility choice for electric vehicle owners was another challenge. And then the last one was a lack of coordination and partnership between government organizations in providing infrastructure and incentivizing the use of electric vehicles. Dubai's goal was to have 25% of the fleet on electric vehicles by 2030. And therefore, there was a need for change. There had to be a big push for creative and innovative partnerships to help achieve this goal. Next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. So the innovation in specific project implementation methods and infrastructure needs that were utilized in this project are specific to the action plan. As you see on the screen, the project developed a vision that was to demonstrate how the deployment of electric vehicles will support aspirations of a sustainable economy. Then they defined the strategic goals as the next step. They came up with 6 specific strategic goals, which identify the broad outcomes of the vision as they relate to electric vehicles market, infrastructure, the general awareness, the requirements of the technology, collaboration, health, and safety, and of course, managing the risk of deploying an emerging technology at this scale. Then they, based on those vision and goals, then they identified objectives and KPIs, key performance indicators. They defined 25 specific objectives created to break down the goals into measurable steps. So these 25 KPIs were designed to evaluate performance and monitor progress for achieving the goals and the vision for this project. And the last step was to identify, based on those goals and objectives and the KPIs, to identify an action plan which defines those specific steps for implementing the project, a clear and evidence-based plan with 36 actions which enables, measures, and incentivizes. So the innovative and overarching specific implementation methods within the action plan that we wanted to share with you today from this experience include a $0 registration. So any electric vehicle owner will not be paying any registration fees. A $0 toll, they will not be paying any tolls for utilizing the transportation network. The other challenge was the safety issue. So with the excessive heat in Dubai and these cars being on electric vehicles and on big batteries, there is always a safety measure of explosion. So the innovative solution they came up with in implementing this was specific license plate identifications to automatically alert the emergency services in the area upon the arrival of the potential safety issues for preparation in local areas. And then last one that we want to share with you are the dynamic parking and the charging fee plans, which was developed to address the land use and transportation integration issues that Dubai was facing. So lessons learned and closing remarks. Again, no matter how innovative or creative our identified technologies are, we'll still need to develop very creative approaches and innovative ideas to successfully implement them in a manner that would help achieve our goals and objectives. And one takeaway from this presentation today, I want all of us to focus on how can we apply this methodology to our corridor in terms of identifying those specific action items that are applicable to emerging technologies, but also designed in a creative manner that can address those specific challenges that we're facing. That's all I had, Adam.
Thank you so much, Ati. And with that, we'll turn it over to Adam O'Brien to speak about a specific infrastructure project.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I seem to lost your audio there, Adam, but if you guys can hear me, it's all good?
Yep, loud and clear.
I can hear you, Adam.
So today, my name is Adam O'Brien. I'm a transportation engineer with Atkins. And today I want to talk to you guys about a bicycle parking garage located at the Central Rail Station in the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands. With space for over 12,500 bicycles, Utrecht has overtaken Tokyo as the home to the largest bicycle parking garage in the world. And of the 5 key areas of innovation, this case study focuses on infrastructure needs, and is an example of innovation and mobility support. Next slide, please. So to touch on some of the challenges of the garage, the previous bicycle parking facilities at this station were over capacity and did not support the high demand. To meet the demand and to ensure that this busy station remained operational during construction, the station upgrades and the new parking garage were built in stages. A unique challenge overcome by this garage was mitigating the need for users to dismount their bicycle to access the parking. The garage is designed to enable cyclists to ride from the street level to the bicycle storage inside, from which they can quickly access the rail station. Carefully designed cyclable ramps provide access to the 3 floors of the biking, and real-time digital systems guide cyclists rapidly to free spaces. Next slide, please, Adam. The outcomes of the station is a station that is easy to use. Cyclists can check into the garage with their public transportation card, and each bike space is fitted with a QR code to allow users to easily find their way back to their bike upon return. The various floors of the garage have been designed to provide easy access to the adjacent land uses, and the city has found that people choose their floors based on what they are going to do. The basement is often used by people who want to catch a train, and people who want to visit the mall prefer to park on the upper level. Utrecht has a bicycle share scheme similar to the B-Cycle scheme in Charlotte, and these bikes are available to rent at the station. And since the parking facility has opened, there's been a 5% growth in rail passengers, and it's also worth noting that over 50% of passengers arrive to Utrecht station by bicycle. We do realize that this station may be the platinum standard of bicycle parking, but elements of this facility could be incorporated into a park and ride or transit facility along the I-77 corridor. And bicycle parking and its security are essential for supporting the development of cycling as a practical transportation choice in any area. So that's my presentation, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, just making sure.
Yes.
So thank you for those examples, Ati and Adam. Those are just 2 specific examples. One is how to implement and go through creating an actual action plan for implementation. And the other one is a specific piece of infrastructure. And so I know that many of you have ideas as to where specific projects could or should be here in the Charlotte region, where they're shovel ready and ready to go tomorrow, or we could look at them in the next 10 to 20 years. And so we're going to have those discussions with you about different mobility projects within our corridor and beyond potentially. So Theo, when you're ready, we'll have these breakout dialogues and we'll keep going with our schedule. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys had some good conversations. I like to compare what Judy, what our magic person has been doing in the background is you imagine the Looney Tunes characters having that cane to get people off the stage. That's what's like bringing you guys back in from those breakout rooms and just bringing you back. So hope you guys had a good discussion. Let's just jump right in and see what some ideas came up. So we'll start with Jarrell's team. Jarrell, who from your group is highlighted some key points?
I can highlight quite a bit of key points. We had began discussing the idea about the bicycle garage in Netherlands. We were saying how that could be something utilized here. Of course, it would have to be applied to accommodate also motor vehicles. It could be a great project for last mile, first mile connectivity, especially those who may drive in or bike into a high capacity transit station. Also, it could be a point where it can become a destination for like car share and also scooters. Furthermore, it is also can just become just a destination in general, just beyond transportation, where such as like along the I-77 North Corridor, they have the managed lanes. Something like that could actually be constructed, and it could be integrated into the environment up there, considering several of the communities on the north side of the region, and particularly Steady Corridor, want more economic development interest to draw people in, and so on and so forth.
All right, very good. So new amenities to drive kind of the economic development perspective and quality of life overall. Very good. James Parker, how about folks from your group and your team?
Sorry, I was on mute. Not sure if my video is working. Seems like my audio is, so that's okay. So our main theme in our group was kind of similar, improving park and rides to add connectivity for other modes like bikes, adding housing, adding retail to what's already pretty expensive real estate in a dense area or along a rapid transit corridor. Thinking about adding solar for electric vehicle charging. Let's see what else. So I mean, I think it could be applied for what we already have existing in our region, as well as we're looking for BRT to the North Corridor, as we're looking at additional transit and park and rides being built out. And also directing our limited funding to improving our connections of greenways to those facilities as well. So just maximizing our resources so they're linked together and not kind of patchwork.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else that has some general comments or points from their discussion before we move on to our conclusions and next steps? I do want to be cognizant of your time today, and I appreciate you spending it with us.
Yeah, this is Andrew Ventresca, and I was in Judy's group. Basically, I wanted to touch on that one thing that we talked about was actual land use when integrating this stuff. And I gave the example that I gave a presentation to a board last night regarding some implementation strategies in our mobility plan. And part of that was for any new development or any redevelopment to require them to put in these charging stations for your electric vehicles. And so part of getting these infrastructure in place is actually following the implementation strategies in your plans. So I just think that's a big thing to hit on, is actually making this stuff part of your ordinances in your local communities.
Very good. Thank you so much for that feedback. And I do want to recognize, I do know that we're over a little bit of time, and so if you do have other comments or feedback from that dialogue that didn't necessarily get covered, please email it to myself and Augustine Rodriguez at CRTPO. And I do want to be sure to capture that feedback so that we can continue to move forward as a part of our project. The conclusion and next steps part of the agenda will include in a follow-up email to everybody, and want to thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us talking about some incredible innovations that we can look forward to. So you will be seeing some draft information coming out in the next few months as to what our team has come up with based on your feedback. And as a reminder, there is a second workshop, exact same format, next Tuesday from 4 until 7:30 p.m. And if you can encourage your colleagues to attend, we've invited quite a list of people, and we certainly do not want to leave others out from our business and civic institutions. So Augustine, I'll pass it back to you, and if you have any other feedback or points to make before we close out for the afternoon.
Yes, thank you, Adam. And thank you to all the participants. I know, again, we're going over the time. On behalf of the consultant team, as well as CRTPO staff, thank you so much again for the opportunity for this dialogue. I think it's been a great success, and we look forward to continue this conversation. I think the next time that we're going to have, in addition to next week, will be in the beginning of next year, probably January or February timeframe, And at that point, we're going to be engaging or inviting the public as well to continue this conversation and more. So as we move forward into recommendations and finalizing these ideas and methodologies, that would be the next process. You will be hearing from me. I will be sending you emails after next week, once we conduct the second workshop, with the links for this material, as well as the videos of this presentation, the recording that will be posted on our website, links directly to our YouTube page or YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in the upcoming months, hopefully next year. Stay safe. Thank you.
Augustine?
Yes.
This is Srinivas. I just want to add, I know Judy wanted me to add before we, let's say, we're done with the workshop, but I was talking about the FAST Las Vegas freeway and arterial system of transportation, which is again to manage their entire Southern Nevada regional network. I like it because it's kind of like involves almost all the jurisdictions. It's kind of like an entity that manages all their CCTV cameras, detectors, signals, anything that you can kind of think about that could have an effect on transportation system. I don't know if they do look at like from a multimodal like pedestrians and bicyclists, but I know CATCH is also under, let's say, the regional agency. Something that certainly is worth exploring, considering, especially if you want to make sure that we are providing a system that serves the region